Public Service Company of New Mexico, what is known to most of us as PNM, is seeking a rate increase this year. PNM says it needs to pay for investments in technology and other costs associated with ensuring the state's power system is reliable. But critics argue PNM is seeking too much money in the rate increase currently under consideration by the Public Regulation Commission. Our producer, Sarah Gustavus, sat down with a local reporter who covers energy to get more details on what we can expect as the public is asked to comment on this proposal.
Kevin Robinson Avila, business reporter with the Albuquerque Journal. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
You have extensive experience covering energy here in New Mexico. That's why we had you come in and talk about what's going on with PNM and their rate request right now. What do we know so far about what the company has submitted to support this request for a 14% hike before the Public Regulation Commission right now?
Well, they're asking for a, as you said, 14% hike. It's actually 14.4 overall average hike if you take all their customers together. But it will hit differently on residential consumers. They'll pay a certain amount, or their bills will go up a certain amount, versus the bigger institutions like Intel or the University of New Mexico or others that consume a different level of electricity. But overall, they're looking for a 14% rate hike. And they filed for that rate increase. It's their first in 5 years that they're filing for, or 6 years actually, I believe, in the fall, or the start of the fall. And it will come up for a hearing in April, where at the Public Regulatory Commission or Public Regulation Commission, they'll evaluate all the ins and outs of what PNM is requesting and whether it's justified or not.
What's PNM saying about why they need this rate hike right now?
The main thing is PNM over the last 5 to 6 years has invested and intends to invest about $655 million in its system. Everything from the generating power plants to the transmission and distribution. And they have not recovered any of those investments or the planned investments that they need to make because their last rate hike was 6 years ago. So most of what they're requesting is to recover those investments. Second thing is, and this is often confusing for people to grasp, but there's so much effort at energy efficiency, which is basically trying to conserve or lower the amount that people consume. It has gone down pretty consistently over the past few years. That's a good thing. Less electricity you don't have to generate is that much less that you have emissions from, and save money and save costs and so forth. But as the consumption of electricity has gone down, PNM's costs to generate the electricity that still is consumed and transmitted and distributed to people stays pretty much the same. Their costs have not gone down. And so you have this disconnect between what people are actually consuming and what it costs to still provide the electricity they need. And so they want to raise the amount people pay for what they call fixed charges so that they can cover more of those fixed costs even as people consume less.
Now that is a concern for, say, the average customer, the average family. You mentioned earlier that there wasn't a breakdown that these rate hike would affect different people differently. Is it going to be more for some residential customers?
In terms of the percentage increase, that is how much more you're going to pay on your monthly bill, the biggest increases will be for residential consumers. The big institutional customers like Intel and others, industrial consumers, I mean, they pay hundreds of thousands of dollars per month for their electricity. And that includes many charges that they get for covering those fixed costs in addition to what they consume each month. The idea is to try to balance out a bit more how much of those fixed cost charges the residential consumers are paying. So, I mean, in essence, if you pay $5 as a fixed charge each month now, independent of what you consume, they want to raise that to $13 on your bill. So that's what PNM is asking for. The amount that it would go up or down for the larger customers would be lower percentage increases, in some cases none at all. To more even out how those costs are being distributed is what PNM says.
What about the folks who have come out and we expect to come out and maybe raise some concerns about this rate request? What are we going to expecting to hear from them?
Well, there are a lot of concerns and a lot of parties have intervened in this case. It all goes before the Public Regulation Commission in open public hearings that last 2 weeks and will start in April. And at that point, at that place, PNM is a regulated company, monopoly. It's given the right to have monopoly market for generating, distributing electricity and getting paid for it, but in return, it needs to justify every expense it makes and what it can get paid back for through rates. And the rates are then decided upon, whether it's justified or not, by the PRC. And each time one of these cases come up, they're always incredibly controversial and they're contested by many parties. In this case, it's at least a dozen different entities, from environmental organizations to clean energy advocates and those that represent consumers or industrial consumers or consumer advocates at the consumer level. They're all intervening, and most of them oppose how much PNM is asking for. Now, they're asking, in terms of percentage increase, 14.4% overall average. Like I said, it'll be staggered who pays how much more. But what they actually are asking for in practice is earning an extra $124 million in revenue each year to cover all those capital investments we talked about of $655 million plus some of the other things that we discussed. The interveners in the case look at, well, okay, what are the different things PNM wants to get recovered? What does it want to get its money back for having spent it on? And they say many of the things that they're spending it on are not justified, or a way being, inflated the prices for it. So you got, for example, the Attorney General, which is basically a consumer advocacy institution, saying that instead of $124 million, we calculate it should only be $27 million extra a year they should be getting. Even the Public Regulation Commission Utility Division staff, those are the worker bees at the PRC that look at the intricacies, ins and outs of all these requests and hearings, say they only think they should be getting $69 million, which is what little over half of what PNM is asking for. So that's going to be the battle during the hearings, to each side or each intervener try to PNM justify why it should get what it's asking for, and the other saying why it should not.
Now, could the PRC say, we've decided this is the number, and that's the number you're going to get, take it or leave it?
In the end, the commission itself, made up of 5 commissioners who are elected, are the ones who will decide. In the hearing, all the different arguments come out. A hearing examiner takes into account all these different arguments and makes the best, most educated decision they can in terms of a recommended decision to the commissioners. They may say, we agree more that it's about the middle, maybe 70 million instead of 124 million, and these are the reasons why, and these are the things that should be taken out. All that then goes before the commissioners, and the commissioners then vote. 5 commissioners, so it's staggered, 3 to 2, you have to win by majority. We'll decide, well, they accept that that's accurate. We'll accept the hearing examiner. No, we can change this. They can change things in it. All of that goes before the commissioners, and they make the final decision. But the laws state what the commissioners, the parameters in which the commission has to act and justify their actions. It can be appealed if they don't follow the rules.
Now, last year we covered quite a bit the San Juan Generating Station, that coal-fired power plant in northwestern New Mexico, where they shut down part of it and were replacing that with a mix of other energy. That was pretty controversial as well. How do the two of these fit together, the rate request now and the San Juan Generating Station?
There are overlaps. The rate case is independent of the whole San Juan case, which was about trying to meet federal haze regulations, emissions coming out of the plant, and how much of the plant should be shut down and how to replace. You still need that electricity if you're shutting down half the plant, how much to, or from what resources to replace that electricity with. It's going to be solar, wind, nuclear, what's it going to be? This is not about the plant itself. That's a case that's over and done with at this point, at least for now. But the investments that PNM has to make to put up alternative resources to provide the electricity, such as a new natural gas peaking plant, as it goes, natural gas generated electricity, something like $56 million, I think they spent, were spending to invest in that plant for some of the electricity that has to be made up. 4 solar facilities built last year, about $80 million. That also will replace some of that generation. Those kinds of things are factored into the $655 million in investments that I talked about. In that sense, there's a direct relation to the rate case. And there's also contested investments, that is, that some of the parties, I said in the case, don't agree with. PNM had to put certain pollution controls on the remaining 2 units that will still operate at the San Juan coal plant. 2 others were shut down. But PNM has put on some extra pollution controls, which it says are very justified to protect workers' health and air quality surrounding the plant, but that are not necessarily required by state or federal regulations. And some of the interveners in the case are saying, well, that 50 million, I think it is 52 million, that PNM has spent on that pollution control should not be recovered. PNM didn't have to put it on, and maybe this plant's going to be shut down in 5 years anyway. We shouldn't be charging ratepayers for it, those people say. So there's that link as well, and that's one of the things being contested. These are the kinds of things that people will debate very intensely, sometimes with conflict at the hearings when they happen in April.
And we will follow your reporting on the Albuquerque Journal and put a link up on our website, newmexicoinfocus.org. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.